Welcome to the Winner's Playbook with Steve and Josh. Disclaimer: the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into account your personal circumstances. Please head to the show notes if you wish to book a free 15-minute call to discuss your personal situation.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Winner's Playbook. I got myself here, Josh, also along with my usual partner in crime, Steve. Steve, how's the week going?
Good, Josh. Yeah, no, mate. It's been busy, flat out. Lots going on around the world and in Australia with these interest rates and the ups and downs that's bringing. But there's always something happening in our world. That's for sure. How's your week?
Yeah, I'd say just the same. It's just, I don't know, it just feels like we haven't had a clean run with the financial markets for quite some time now. And I know, just keep talking about the last 3 years we've had since COVID really kicked everything off. It just feels like markets haven't got back to any sort of normality whatsoever. It's been down, it's gone up, down, up, and now we're back down again. So it's just, I don't know how you sort of put your finger on it, Steve. What are some of the things you're saying to your clients at the moment?
Patience, mate. You just got to be patient and just ride it out. It's hard to accept sometimes, but investing is a patience game, really. And I'm not going to say ignore it, the ups and downs, but you've got to sort of not look at the noise, right? And just try to block it out and just continue with your trajectory of the next 10 years. It's really a 10-year story when you invest in growth assets, and you've got to stick to your guns a bit there.
Yeah, and I think a key takeaway as well for a lot of people is if you've got your investment portfolios and you are seeing them fall in value at this point in time, you haven't actually lost any money until you sell those underlying investments. So although you might see them draw down or lose value on paper temporarily for a period of time, unless you actually sell and exit out, you haven't physically lost anything. And that goes for shares most commonly, but also for property. A lot of people don't understand that the same principles really apply with property. Property prices do go up and down all the time. And although you don't see them fluctuating as much as you would say a share portfolio, prices in property, all the same principles apply. And it's all about just sticking to that long-term time frame and keeping that all in mind. So talking about property, though, we're going to get into it today, guys. Really, the key topic that we're wanting to talk about today is the Australian dream. What is it? What does it mean? And is it dead? So throwing over to you, Steve, what are we talking about when we're referring to the Australian dream?
Yeah, look, I reckon for Australians, I think it's all about the Australian dream being that ownership of a property, and probably not an investment property, the house you live in. I think that's probably originally, over the last 20 years has probably been that in terms of, that's the house you live in. You want to live in that spot. And it's been obviously in the papers and top of the agenda and talking points probably around the dinner table a lot, in particular over the last couple of years with how expensive it's got. And look, and fair enough, there's a lot of things going on in that world and with property prices where they are today and how expensive it is today in most capital cities, it's definitely worth a talking point. But as we'll probably dive into today, there's options out there, and there's definitely as long as you've got an open mind with property and how it's going to look for you, there's definitely ways that you can achieve it. How about yourself, mate? What's your take on the Australian dream? And I suppose, if we get into the detail, how do you think it's sort of changed over the last couple of years with what's been happening?
Yeah, well, obviously Australians, we just love property. Like there's just a fascination about Australian property and people just love it. And I think it goes back to a bit of what we were talking about in the last episode of sort of what's passed on from your parents and really being ingrained into the Australian culture. It's always about getting out there and trying to buy your first home as quickly as you possibly can. But I think how all of the dynamics of all that works is just changing with prices and wages not necessarily keeping up with it, and a lot more people wanting to rent as opposed to necessarily buy and not always be stuck in one location. I think that Australian dream really needs to, I think we need to really rethink how that sort of looks and feels, because I think you can achieve home ownership, but not necessarily have to, or the Australian dream, so to speak, but not necessarily own the home that you live in, but still have your foot on the property ladder, so to speak, as well, which is something that I think we'll touch on, being more of around a rent vesting type strategy, which is actually something I personally do, a rent vesting type strategy. But before we get into that, Steve, what about a bit of your own experience just in relation to property? So what was your sort of first sort of dipping your toes into the property market? How'd that go for you?
Yeah, look, first real purchase. I didn't really buy my first major property until I was in my early 30s. It was for me. It was a place in Melbourne. It was a townhouse. Prior to that, I had bought an apartment off my mum who needed to free up some cash at the time. But really, my first foray into property was not until I was 30. I bought that with my now current wife, which was good. But and one of the strategies we'll talk about is how to do it. And that property itself was probably not the ideal property. It wasn't the stay in forever property, but it was definitely a property that I could afford at the time and actually get my toe in the water. And then since then, I've been able to buy another two. And one of those properties being our now current property we live in, a lot bigger family home and in the spot we want to be. But I definitely used that first property in Melbourne to get into the market. And that's probably the message out of all this is probably, if you want to get into the market, you don't necessarily need to buy in the spot that you absolutely love and where you want to end up, right?
The first one's never usually going to be the forever home.
No, that's right. So I think just setting realistic expectations, don't be afraid to be flexible with where that is, like if it's a bit further out or, it's okay. If you have to drive a bit further for a while to get to work or you see friends or family, whatever it may be, that's fine, and see it as a bit of a platform to then go to the next stage, right? And I think if you're open to that sort of stuff, anything's possible, I've seen clients, and I think in our job, Josh, and you'd probably agree to this, we do so many meetings in a year. I think I was counted today, 2,000 to 3,000 meetings that we've done, right? And so we see a lot of client circumstances and what works and what doesn't work. And I've seen a lot of successful people with property portfolios and living in the house they want with not a lot of income because they've done it, with small incremental movements over the journey. So how about yourself, mate? What was your foray into the property market?
Yeah, so I suppose my way of getting into the property market is probably something that a lot of people can take from this is there's always different ways of getting in, and you don't necessarily have to, come up with the usual 20% deposit that everyone always harps on about. And there's obviously a lot of different government schemes and initiatives of getting in, but I got in at a relatively early age. I think I was 21, 22 when we bought the first property, and we actually did it utilizing a guarantor type arrangement. So we did have money to put down a 20% deposit, but I didn't necessarily want to put all of my eggs into one basket, so to speak. So we did want to hold on to some cash, and I was doing a lot of other investing at the time. So we actually utilized a guarantor arrangement. So how that worked was my partner, which is now my wife, of course, her parents basically, had some equity in one of the properties that they had. And the bank was able to utilize that equity and essentially take security over their home to allow us to, I think we put in approximately, all things said and done, maybe 5 to 7%. I think we roughly put into that purchase. We also didn't have to pay any stamp duty, of which is still relevant today, up to here in Victoria, if we're talking up to $600,000, you don't pay stamp duty on your first home, and that does phase out up to $750,000. So we purchased for about $560,000, so we didn't have to pay stamp duty. That was a nice saving. But then also the first homeowners grant was relevant to us at the time as well, and is still relevant to people buying a new property or new build here as well. So coupled those two, the stamp duty discount plus the first homeowners grant, that was about $40,000 in value that we saved just alone. So that was a massive saving for us. And then using the guarantor arrangement actually allowed us to get in with a relatively small deposit. So that was really our first step into the property market. And I think when you're buying your first home, you just don't really know what you're doing. Like we weren't buying because we thought, it was we thought it was going to be an amazing investment. We thought it was a good place, good location, but it was never going to be the forever home. And we stuck in there for probably 2 or 3 years, and now we've made it an investment property, and now I've gone on to do other bits and pieces as well. So, I think there's always a way of getting in, but I am naturally a fan of trying to get in sooner rather than later, so to speak. I think as soon as you can get your sort of foot into the property ladder, I think that is, it is a good thing. Property prices generally are going up over the longer term, but I think there are some, pitfalls to look out for in some of that. But I think a real key thing to understand with property though as well is you got to separate the emotion from buying, the dream family home, because that's more of an emotional decision, and you got to separate, an investment decision as well, because they're both very, very different. Whereas if you're looking more at the family home, like that's an emotional decision. You're not really concerned about, if it's going to go up in value because you want the facilities, you're in a good location, whatever it may be. But whereas if it's an investment decision, which a lot of our clients and we're helping them make, it's around like where in Australia could you be investing to get your best bang for buck, so to speak. So I think, yeah, that Australian dream really does center around probably an older school way of thinking. I think more of the up and coming generations, I don't think are going to be necessarily as focused on that in my view anyway.
Yeah, yeah. And talk a bit more about the concessions, mate, around the country. They're still around. What can people get access to these days?
Yeah, so all the states are a little bit different. So all of them have got some sort of a first homeowners grant, but the amount that you get will vary between states. So I think Tasmania might be up to $30,000 you can get on the first homeowners grant, which is quite high.
Yeah.
Victoria is $10,000 in metro. If you're getting out to regional, I think it goes up to about $20,000. Then they've all got some sort of usually a stamp duty type exemption. Of course, you've got to check it state by state, and usually your mortgage broker is going to be the best point of call for all of this stuff. So definitely, if you're looking at buying a home, where's your best starting point? Just speak to your mortgage broker. Definitely is the way to start. But you've got your stamp duty exemptions. But then you start getting into the other government initiatives, and they're obviously trying to do their part in, creating that Australian dream for more people and to be able to get into their first property. And there's all the different schemes these days, the 5% deposit scheme that you can get in and not pay any lender's mortgage insurance. There's the home, what do they call it? The home share scheme, where the government actually owns a portion of your property. I don't know how keen I'll be on doing that one, but there's a lot of different schemes out there. And I would always say the first point of call is just speak to your mortgage broker who can actually understand your income and how much you can borrow and go from there. But there are a lot of income restrictions on some of those government schemes as well. So I think they hover around, if you're a single, about 120, 130 in terms of total earnings. And if you're a couple, I think it's about $200,000 the cutoff are for those. So there's a lot of different options out there. But you need a mortgage broker, I think, to navigate those.
Yeah, and do you think, obviously we do a lot of meetings with younger people, older people. Do you think the term, the Australian dream and the idea of ownership of property is changing?
Yeah, 100%. I think it is, because obviously a lot of the younger generation, just feeling priced out of the market, and the reality is some of them feel that they're never going to get into the property market in the first place. And that's why I think people need to rethink how they're going to plan out their property, intro, or trying to get into the market in the first place. And even talking to a strategy, if we're talking about other ways that you could possibly do it, rent vesting is a real popular one, and that's something I've even done for myself. And for everyone listening to understand how a rent vesting strategy works is, ideally you're wanting to live in a location wherever that may be, but maybe you can't afford to buy in that location because it's too expensive or whatever it is. So what you instead try to do is you try and rent in your ideal location or somewhere similar. So you pay rent, you do not buy that property. But then once you're in that property, you then look at buying an investment property, not where you're wanting to live, but in a completely different location, which is usually going to be a lot cheaper than the area you're actually living in, because you can't afford to buy there. So you instead rent, and you look at buying a property somewhere else around Australia, which is, again, it's purely an investment decision. So it's not an emotional decision that you're making there. It is an investment decision that you are making, and that's something that we've personally done. But I think you can go a lot deeper than that as well, Stephen, to a point that I was going to raise earlier that you said. So you kind of got into the property market in your 30s, but it wasn't like in your 20s you weren't doing anything with your money. So you were in business and doing other bits and pieces. People think when you're renting, it's dead money and you're not doing anything with your money. But I would argue it's more about what you're then doing with your time and the rest of your money, because you could be renting a small little student apartment in your early 20s, but you're trying to buckle down and build this huge, amazing business. So I think you got to look a lot deeper into that, because the renting solution can actually be a really good one for a lot of people's circumstances, and it's actually something I do work with a lot of clients.
Yeah, totally, and that was my exact position. I was building a business. I owned a business from the age of 21, and then owned a financial planning practice from the age of 29. So it just wasn't my priority. My priority was building that career, building that wealth in other means other than property. So I think it gets down to your purpose. What is your actual purpose of all this? And I think the Australian dream is changing completely, and I think people are now opening up to realize that property, yes, it is a good asset and it's great to have it part of the portfolios, but there's other means and other ways to either create wealth or get into property in different ways as well, which we'll touch on. So I just think it's important for people to really get an understanding of what they're trying to achieve in life, what they want to do, and sit down and get some good advice about options, I think, whether that be through mortgage brokers, financial advisors, property advocates, and really getting educated around what your options are. I think that's a good first step. You suck out all that information from as many people as you can. You use all their knowledge. I think it's your first step. And then, if property is, the way to go, as you said before, consider your options. There's also the whole country. The media loves to talk about average prices being in the millions. There's a lot of properties out there for 300 and 400 and 500,000. So you just got to find them, and maybe that's where a good property advocate can come into play and assist. But if I live in Adelaide half the week and Melbourne half the week, and I know the Adelaide market, there's lots of properties, in that lower zone that you can get into, especially as a good first step. It might have to be an investment property, which is fine, but definitely just treading carefully into the market might be the way to go.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. And that's why I do like the rent vesting strategy, because it's if you don't like the property you live in, you're not stuck there. So it does allow you to be very, very nimble. And it takes a bit of the pressure off having to, decide where you think you want to live for the next 5 or 10 years. Because ultimately, if we don't like the place that we're in right now, we can get up and leave and find another place. And again, that's why I really do like it, because it allows you to be nimble and a little bit more fluid, which is what, a lot of people might want to do in their early 20s as well, and not be stuck down in one location. Because getting in and out of property as well is very expensive, and that's why you do want to try and limit your sort of movement there. You don't want to always be typically upgrading, in my opinion, because you're generally sort of losing 5 to 7% on the in and the out, because, well, usually, unless you get your stamp duty exemptions and whatnot, but if you take into account the median house price is around $730,000 these days, that's kind of putting you at the upper limit of getting any stamp duty exemption there. So if you look at the ins and outs of costs of getting in and out of property, you don't generally want to be transacting too much, and that's where some people do go down that rent vesting route, and they never really buy a forever home, and they just stay nimble and keep moving around and just continuously look to build an investment or a property portfolio outside of that, which I guess is, and another key point is that the home that you live in as well. It's not, a lot of people see it as an asset, which you can argue it is and it isn't, because if you look at what an asset actually is, it puts money in your pocket, but the home that you live in doesn't actually put any money in your pocket. It actually just takes away, because you're paying your mortgage and there's, all the upkeep on that property. And then the other big one is that the big debt that you take on for your family home as well, it's not tax deductible. So if you compare that to buying an investment property, well, the debt is tax deductible and it is paying you an income as well. And that's why I think we've got to kind of reframe, what that and maybe the Australian dream is, that you're renting and you're buying an investment property. But I think going back to what we do with all of our clients is everyone's goals are going to be different, and what it is for you versus what it is for me are going to be completely different.
Yeah, totally. And so what are some of the options you're seeing out there, Josh, and what are some clients doing that, apart from just buying a family home, what are some of the things they're doing to achieve either their property goals or their just wealth goals in general?
Yeah, so I guess the two main assets that we're generally going to be working with clients around is, growth assets. So share portfolios, investment portfolios, looking at managed funds and ETFs. And that's even how I started out. So I actually was investing in the share market and doing a bit of that. And that's what actually got my deposit built up, was doing some investment in the first place. And then I ended up pulling that out to get into the property market. And that's what I think people need to understand is you can get similar rates of return, if not better, using some of these other investments out there, but you don't have all of the other stresses of actually having to build up a large deposit and buy a property as well. So there's plenty of different options, available in that space. But again, it's just going to come down to your individual goals. And yeah, if you do want to get into the property market, if I was going to throw in a couple of tips on, how to best do it with trying to combat inflation and interest rates and everything that's going out there at the moment, first starting point would just speak to your mortgage broker first of all, so you can understand how much you can borrow and actually set out a bit of a plan in relation to it. And then once you know what you can actually borrow and what you're working with, well, then you obviously got to get your savings organized. So, what do you want to be doing there? So maybe you're doing a budget. looking at all of your expenditure, what can you cut out so you can actually improve on how much you're saving and what your cash flow is doing. And cash flow is always a critical part of any planning that we're doing. But once you've really nailed your cash flow and expenditure, you're building up your deposit. And I suppose the other part of then looking at it is, well, then, how can you figure out how to earn more money? Because there's no cap on how much money you can earn in your life. And really, you're the only one that is, stopping yourself. So usually you're your biggest impediment in a way. So as much as you may want something, it just comes down to you as an individual. So those would be some of the tips I can think of on my side of things. But the real big one is just change your way of thinking about getting into the property market. Like, I think you just got to really sit down and try and figure out what it is for you. And that may not be even buying that property initially. And it might be going down a different route and doubling down on a business venture or whatever it may be. What about for yourself, Steve? What would you add?
Yeah, look, I totally agree with all that, especially, increasing your income, right? Like if you increase your income, not going to be an issue. So maybe investing in your education to start with to build up your income base, might be the best way to go. Look, I think there's options out there. If it's, you can go in with family and friends. I've seen like a lot of scenarios where clients have definitely with family teed up a lot of times with their sisters or brothers or mums and dads and gone in together. That to get in the property market is a good one. Obviously, looking outside the normal areas that are suggested in different cities around Australia, it's a huge landscape out there in terms of size of property, type of property you want to get into. You may not buy a house to start. It might be an apartment, and buying the right apartment in the right spot could go wrong, or it might be a commercial property. There's lots of different ways like that. But clearly, like a lot of the work we do through self-managed super funds, people are out there, buying investment properties in their super so they can use that amount of money in there if they don't have the cash outside super. Sometimes it's beneficial and in their best interest to do it that way. So I think, as we said at the start of this recording, if you're just open to different ideas and how it can work, there's definitely options. It's just about understanding what those options are and working out the best strategy for individuals. Because as you said, everyone's goals are slightly different. So where there's a will, there's a way, right?
Yeah. And I think we're looking at some of the stats just before we got on here around, home ownership, and it's obviously coinciding with everything that we're talking about here, that it's getting harder to get into your first home. And I think, the stats that we're looking at before was around the 1970s, home ownership was around 70% or so here in Australia, and it's just been steadily declining now. And particularly if you look at between 25 to 34-year-olds, that seems to be, dropping at a pretty rapid rate. Would you put that down to a couple of key things, or what would you put that down to?
Look, mate, I saw some of those stats, and it seems to be the only age group that wasn't going south was, if they're 65 years and above, which sort of makes sense, right? Yeah, they're cruising. Generally, and typically the ones without the mortgage, right?
Yep.
Look, clearly, I think that just the cost to run a household and service the debts, I think, is having a huge impact. On these figures. And next week we're most likely probably going to see another rate rise, which should add a little bit more pain. So I think it's just probably down to that figure, and maybe just the change of views on that Australian dream. Now it's realizing that we can make money elsewhere. We can set ourselves up financially by doing different things. We can open a business instead of buying a house. I think in general, over the last 5-10 years dealing with clients, I have seen that change of attitude. Sure, it's still there. It definitely is still there. I think, as you said at the start, Australians love property. But just how that property looks and feels in their lives, that's probably changing. And I think now investment rather than home ownership is definitely talked about a lot more. And Josh, with the interest rates, mate, I love to ask this question because, paying down investment debt, a lot, the conversation around investment properties and having investment debt and keeping investment debt rather than paying it down. What's your views there?
It's an interesting one because as interest rates, we've gone from 2% interest rates to now north of 6%, and even on some of my loans, getting up into those high sixes. So it really changes the equation, I think, a little bit around some of the planning that we're doing with clients. Because when interest rates were down around 2%, it didn't necessarily make any sense to pay down debt because it was just so cheap to hold. And if you look at the opportunity cost of, if you were to pay down that debt, what else could you be doing with your money? And say that is investing into the share market or whatever it may be, which typically does on average 9% over the longer term. There was a big margin between, paying down your debt costing you 2 or 3% and getting returns of 8 or 9% plus in some other investments. But, now that gap has just completely shrunk. And if your mortgage is costing you, 5.5, 6, maybe even 7%, it does start to bring back into play, looking at actually starting to pay down that debt. Or if not, the way I prefer to personally do it, and of course, this isn't advice to anyone that's listening, because you've got to figure out what it is for your circumstances, but, utilizing an offset account. So, there's some traps that you actually got to watch out for, which is, probably worth digging in another episode. But, paying money into your mortgage, and then yes, you can bring it back out from with a redraw facility. But once you paid into your mortgage, it's actually not your money; it's the bank's money. And if you're pulling it back out of that redraw, you're actually borrowing from yourself. So, another way of doing it might be having an offset account and parking extra cash in there, because in essence, it's having the exact same effect as paying money into your mortgage. It's reducing the amount of interest you're paying, but it's just a savings account linked to your mortgage, and it's just going to reduce the amount of interest that you pay. But 100%, all the clients that I'm speaking with now, it is starting to come back into the equation, particularly the older clients as well. Not, some of the younger clients, we are still, really not too fussed around paying down debt, because they've got 20, 30, 40 years in some instances to, get the debt down. So we're not too fussed necessarily about it, and, considering interest-only loans and so on. But yeah, that debt equation now, and that differential between interest rates and what you can get on your investments elsewhere is definitely shrunk. So I think there's been a bit of a change in some of that, and people are focusing a lot more around actually starting to sort of lug down their debt. What about you, Steve?
Yeah, I just think there's a lot to be said about actually making money on investment properties. Yeah, I think the conversation around constantly losing money, which means it's negatively geared, right?
Yeah.
I think that conversation, I'm just a bit lost sometimes about why people go on about negative gearing so much, when realistically we want to make money.
You're making a loss.
Making a loss. Like, what's the
Yeah.
point? So I think that conversation, like, I know I have it, and I know you have it with clients. Like, negative gearing is not that great, because
No.
you're losing money, and the idea is you want to make more. Sure, you might need to pay a little bit of tax on it, but that's as good signs of a good thing,
Yeah, and I think
So,
you're never buying any investment, if you're buying it for as a tax break or something, that's not a good thing.
no,
You know.
no, totally. So I think it's all about trying to make more money, do it tax
Yep.
effectively, great. But paying down debt's a good thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, sure, we probably want to focus a little bit more on the non-deductible stuff first.
Yeah.
I get that, but part of the strategy absolutely should be paying down all debt to get rid of it, and let's make more income. So
Yeah.
I think that conversation gets lost. I know it gets lost on some financial advisors, and definitely gets lost on some mortgage brokers as well. So, we probably think about it a bit differently at Link, which I think is a good thing.
Definitely. And what about if someone's, if there's a situation where someone's got, say, various debts, what are some of the key pointers with that? Like, say they've got a credit card that needs to, be brought under control. Maybe they've got a car loan and a home loan. Like, how do we go about deciphering which one to attack and go at first?
Yeah, look, you've definitely got options, and it's about sitting down with your advisor or broker to really look at the best structure here, because you can definitely clean up your situation, increase cash flow very quickly by getting rid of the high interest credit cards and personal loans. Maybe pushing out some repayment terms on your home loan and doing a cash out. There's stacks and stacks of options that you can do, and it really is about getting the right advice, the best advice for you to get the right structure in place. But I've dealt with many clients, some with 20, 30, 40, $50,000 of credit card debt, where we've managed to clean it out and pay it all off within one hit. And then we go on a payment, just get it on the mortgage and then focus on the one loan with the mortgage. So very, very, very wise to get some good advice in that space if you're in that position.
Yeah. And one more for you, Steve, then, a key part of all of this equation with anything you're doing in life, that is building a business, or you want to buy a home, or you want to pay off your debt, comes down to, income, and where's that income coming from? Throwing it over to you, what would be some tips you reckon for some of the people listening? Like, if they're struggling, to make a living or earn a wage, and they're, in a bad spot, or whatever it may be, like, do you have any tips you would say to, how can you go about starting to improve your income, or just getting extra money into the household? Because I know I've definitely got clients out at the moment that are, super worried about their fixed rates coming to an end on their mortgage, and what do they do? What are some of the things that you're saying to clients there?
Yeah, look, you want to make an impact, right? So it's about
Yeah,
understanding what your big expenses are and just seeing if there's any way you can reduce that. So clearly the mortgage
sure.
is the big one. Can
Yeah,
you restructure? Can you refinance? Pushing out the loan terms to reduce that
yeah,
cash flow impact.
yeah,
The school fees, the insurance premiums, the big ticket items on your P&L, as you call it, your personal
yeah,
P&L. Have a look at them hard and just see what can you do to reduce that where you can to free up that extra cash flow. you know, Side hustles are always good.
big
Side
time.
hustles at any time of life are always good. I know you and I in business, we constantly look at different revenue streams.
Yeah,
That even in the good times, we look at increasing revenue streams.
yeah,
You should be doing that all the time, right? So definitely in times where it's going to be a bit tough, so you got to find an extra $1,000. Well, have a look at what's the way you can find an extra $1,000 by opening up a side hustle. It's as
yeah,
simple as
definitely.
that. So yeah, look, it might be a bit hard with education because that does take time
Yeah,
and you've got to put a couple of years into it to get that extra education. But definitely
mm,
side hustles. I've seen many clients just open up, rent out a room,
yeah,
Airbnb, rent their car out.
yeah.
There's a number of things you can do which are fairly easy to find a bit of extra cash. So combine that all together, and
Mm.
you've fix your cash flow issue. Yeah.
I agree. Have you had any funky side hustles, Steve, along the journey, or?
Mate, all the time. I've got one of
Yeah,
my places on Airbnb
yep,
recently, and I think I've had conversations with you. It doesn't make you stacks of money, but it
yeah,
does help pay the bills, and
yeah,
sometimes that's what you need.
yeah,
And it's not forever. These
yeah,
times we're going through right now, they won't be forever.
yeah.
So it's just a short term period. You just got to manage through, and then you go again.
Yep, agree. And it doesn't need to be in the field that you're working in. Like, for a while there, I had a little gardening business going on that, was
I
every
don't
couple
doubt
of
it.
fortnights, and I think it maybe turned over 10 or 15K a year. It was,
Mm.
did quite well, and little things like that could be the difference between people keeping their home and having to sell it these days, or maybe getting into your first home quicker because it's going to allow you to, save at more of a rapid rate. So, in the end, it always just comes down to you as the individual, and I think how bad you want it.
Yeah, mate. And just on closing it off, where do you think the property markets and these interest rates are going over the next couple of years?
Yeah, it's so hard to put your finger on it because it looked like for the last couple of months that we had seen the end of these interest rate hikes and cycle, and now it looks like we're gonna see another rise in the coming month. If I was to take a wild guesstimate, I would think that maybe we do see another rise from here leading into the end of the year, quite possibly. Maybe it sticks around the rates that we are now for the next 12 months, but I think naturally all of the market is the expectations are that interest rates aren't going to stay this high forever, and
Mm.
eventually they will come back down, but they're not going to go back down. I think people need to understand to where they were, because where they were was around that 2.5% mark, which was only put in place because of COVID, and that was an
Yeah,
emergency sort of event and real black swan that caught the world by storm, so to speak. So I think people need to be accustomed to a higher interest rate environment where that sort of settles. An average mortgage of around interest rate 4.5% probably feels about a
yeah,
little bit about right, but we're obviously hovering a little bit above there now. But that's just a part of having to try and get this inflation all under control. And then where do prices go? It's so hard to say because the property prices were falling off for quite a period of time, and now they're on the way back up, all in the view of, or all in the eyes of inflation and interest rates rising. But I think there's a few other dynamics going on there as well with, there's just a lack of houses and supply here in Australia. And there's obviously a huge demand because, Australians absolutely love the property. And then you throw in the, migration into Australia on top of it. And then that sort of creates a bit of a perfect storm for prices to maybe keep moving forward. And then plus you've got the rental market that's running hot as well. But Steve, you've been around the block a little bit more than me. What do you think?
what are you trying to say? I'm a bit older, or
Could be.
just mate? Look, I agree. I think we're in for about 12 or 18 months of pain here. I can't see
Mm,
them coming off too quick.
yeah,
But after that, yeah, I agree. They're gonna probably come off. So I think we got to strap in for get ready for 18 months of a bit of pain and find some extra cash.
yeah,
That's the interest rate side of the fence. Clearly, I think they're too high, but they're only too high because of this inflation issue. So I think once the inflation issue goes away, we will see some reprieve.
Yeah.
But on the house pricing affordability side, I can't see that going away ever. Well, not now, next 10 years, because
No.
we just have such an issue with supply, right? And
Yeah.
and no one's doing really too much about it. So that the idea that property prices are going to come off in a significant manner to make a material difference is just not going to happen. We've got too many people looking for these houses, way too much demand. It's going to hold the prices up. Sure, they probably won't grow like to what they have been doing, but the idea that they're going to reduce from here, I just can't see it happening. So, I think it's find ways, find options, keep your mindset open.
Yeah.
Look at different ways to do things. And if you do that, there's definitely a way to get in the market. You just got to be mindful and open to that, and then get the right advice.
Totally agree. And I think it's just, be open-minded, get a plan in place, and just don't have a victim's mindset 100%. So, guys, that's all we've got time for today. So I just want to appreciate anyone that does listen into this. And if you get any sort of value from it as well, please do give us a follow on the socials. We're very big on TikTok, all the others, Instagram, YouTube, etc., LinkedIn as well. So, guys, please do give us a follow. And any parting messages at all, Steve?
No, mate. Look, it's been a great chat. Keep your mindset open, and anything's achievable.
Done. Appreciate it, guys. We'll see you on the next episode.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
Done.